To the speech this morning of Ibrahim.
Yes.
What was your impression?
My impression about it is he actually stated his stand as a Muslim. Also discourages discrimination and corruption and uninclusiveness in the affairs of governance. So I think it was okay. He tried, but as a political analyst, your view definitely will be different from mine.
I was quite impressed. I mean, a man who, do you know, he spent 11 years in solitary confinement. He had access to the Quran, and he had, of course, a lot of time for meditation upon big topics. And I thought that this speech this morning, without any script, is powerful, and he clearly could have gone on for much longer. And it's a particular Malay Muslim perspective on the world, criticizing tribalism and thoughtlessness and extremism, strong emphasis on equality, and the dangers of becoming a society. So, and maybe the next Prime Minister.
Yes.
Yeah, it's quite a tale, and I was impressed, I have to say. Tell me about yourself.
Prof, I'm Emmanuel. I'm a Nigerian.
You're from Lagos, yeah?
No, Eastern Nigeria.
Oh, you are Eastern?
Abia State. And I did History and International Relations in my country. Coming in here, I needed business knowledge. So I started from diploma in business, which I finished last year. I've also enrolled in BSc Business Admin. I just rushed after the speech to write my exam. I just finished writing the exam. I had to rush back because what I'm getting from the conference is actually mind-blowing. And the little time I had with you and everything, actually always have this play politics. And most of the times what happens in Africa makes me angry. So
what makes you angry?
The leadership pattern in Africa, the
corrupt.
Yes, the unconcerned attitude of leadership in Africa, the ethnocentric leadership in Africa, where some people think they are the ownership of the leadership phase of the nation. So it angers me a lot.
Good leadership is. What are the principles of good leadership, put in the abstract, would you say, from what you have learned so far, and what you imagine your future to be? What is a good leader in politics or in other areas?
A good leader to me is someone that has the concern of the leg. Good leadership has to have concern of the leg. A good leadership has to involve commitment and sacrifice. And I'm actually writing on something which also has to do with leadership, because one of the mistakes I've discovered about African leadership is the mistakes in decision making. The mistakes of the leaders in decision making. Thank you, Prof. So I discovered that there are 4 things people should avoid, or 3 things people should avoid in decision making, which I think is actually clean African leadership. Number 1 is sentiment. African leaders take decisions sentimentally. And number 2 is
So there's A need for more thoughtful, wise, prudent,
Yes.
rational
Yes.
decision making. Yes.
Another thing is they attach emotion in their decision making. Because the emotion has to do with their bilateral agreement, like what you told me yesterday when we were talking about Africa-China relations, and you were saying, I was asking you a way, I say Africans should be proactive in their negotiation with China. They will make sure that the negotiation is well balancing on their side.
Yeah.
So I think they attach emotion when they see all these foreigners come to Africa. They lose their strength when they want to take decisions. So they just dabble into their affairs. At the end of the day, the masses suffer. Then another thing is relationship. People should avoid relationship in decision making because.
What do you mean by that?
Yes, because 80% of the people that are leading or ruling in African society, when you have a president have to get involved incompetent people just because they are related.
All right.
In one way or the other. Family members, clan.
This is nepotism.
Yes.
I mean, clientelism is
Yes.
the more technical term. It's considered to be, there is an Arab joke that wasta. Wasta is the art of making connections. Wasta is the sexually transmitted disease of the Arab world. This is a joke.
Yes.
It's an Arab joke about the way in which most of the regimes that govern in the Arab world are riddled with this kind of nepotism, this kind of clientelism at the top, and it is, tempting as a leader when you get into high positions in whatever organization. It's tempting to form alliances with friends, with trusted ones, but it can ruin your reputation for integrity, for openness, for unsentimental, wise decisions.
Like Bill Clinton, his relationship with Lewinsky, the lady.
It's also much more than that. It's his business connections, and which he earned, built up through law practice, and yes, these have corrupting influence.
The thing is actually eating up to it.
Sure.
So a good leader has to be focused, has to remove sentiment, emotion, relationship. Just focus, do the job. You don't need to care who else is God. You just do your job and be the best.
Perhaps we should carry on talking about leadership because I think it's very central and it's obviously personally important for you, and it's an important question in the African context. It's a global question. In your list of criteria, I would add a couple. I think that because we are living in media-saturated societies, communicative abundance, the age of communicative abundance, this means that a leader has to have what I call narrative intelligence. They have to have the ability to tell a story about themselves and the context in which they're operating, a story that is meaningful, persuasive, and has a measure of openness in it to those upon whom they depend, or led, as you put it. And this narrative intelligence is learned. I think leaders are not born with this. Whatever they might say, they learn to do this. And some are excellent at it. Here, I think it's very important, it's another qualification, to distinguish between different types of leadership. I mean, you can have a demagogue. A demagogue has more than a few of the qualities you just mentioned. But a demagogue is someone who becomes victim to a form of narcissism, a form of self-referencing. The Germans have a wonderful word for this. The demagogue is an Ich-Spieler. Ich-Spieler means they play the role of themselves on stage. And they do this knowingly, in full glare of cameras and social media and radio and television and newspapers. But they do that with anti-democratic consequences. A democratic leader is someone who has those qualities that you mentioned, who knows that they depend upon the led, who are not driven exclusively by sentiment, who have a willingness to listen. But a democratic leader has a kind of narrative intelligence that is open to contradiction, whose strength comes from listening to others and to absorbing complaints that their ears may not want to hear. And that narrative intelligence, the ability to tell a story to others, and to do so wisely and without too much passion, cool-headedly, so to say, knowing that their power comes as a leader from the people led. This narrative intelligence is one which is open, and it can even be self-satirical, making fun of yourself. You say, great, Obama was good at this. Trump is incapable of this, to take two American examples. So this is, narrative intelligence is very important, and that is a learned art. And of course, it's not an easy act to perform, because in any context now, whether it's Nigeria or it's Cambodia or it's Philippines or it's Australia or New Zealand, in any context now, everything you do is encased within a media frame, and this is unavoidable. A leader who stays silent and is not seen publicly in our age doesn't last long.
Sure.
This was, by the way, in Africa, it was a common type of behavior, pre-colonial behavior, where local rulers in African countries, they're not seen. They're not seen because it's understood that if they are seen too often, their authority will drain away. We are living in an age where just the opposite is the case, and that is why this issue of demagogic leadership, populist demagogy, versus a kind of open democratic leadership, that distinction is very important. Another thing I would say that maybe you don't realize, but others listening, if this is for you too, don't realize, is that in English language and in other European languages, the word leader only appears in the 18th century. And initially, it's a word only used to describe, for example, leadership in a church, or the leader of a marching band, or the leader of a choir, singing choir. In other words, it doesn't have immediately political understanding. And so leadership was a word first applied to what came to be called civil society. Only later was it politicized, so that today, if you ask people in various parts of the world to explain what a leader is, they will talk about politicians. They will talk about Xi Jinping, or they will talk about Theresa May, or they will talk about Angela Merkel. This is a kind of politicization whose history is not very well understood. And I think there is a lesson there because a number of lessons. One is that leadership can be exercised, so to say, not in the governmental domain. And I've tried to write in all of my writings on broadcasting on democracy, I've tried to say that actually unelected leaders are of growing importance for democracies, for power sharing. We need leaders in the field of religion, we need leaders in the field of business, we need leaders in the field of sport as a counterbalance against the over-politicization of leadership and power sharing. And I think there are signs that have been developing that actually these non-governmental leaders are more important and more respected than political leaders who are often thought of as corrupt, as narcissistic, as bullies, as not wise people. Whereas in the field of, let's say, someone like Bill Gates, or let's say someone like Kumi Naidu, who's a South African who is now head of Amnesty International. The respect for people like this is much higher than the respect for governmental leaders. So that's one implication. The other interesting thing about this history of the meaning of leadership is that there is a growing pattern of life after high office. So I have written a study of what happens when you leave high office. What do you do? Well, it's clear that the pattern is mixed. Some make a huge amount of money. They go into business and they use their high office to make money. Blair. Yeah. Tony Blair. Yeah. Charges at least £200,000 for a 40-minute speech. And actually doesn't have great respect at home or abroad. But he makes money. Another is that you just disappear from the face of the earth and you're never seen again. That's not so much common anymore. There were sayings in 19th century politics that after high office, you take pills and you reach for the bottle and you slip quietly away. Another pathway for leaders after high office is that they actually become very good leaders. I mean, even more respected than they were as governmental figures. This is Jimmy Carter. Because politicians are living much longer and usually don't stay forever in high office because of term limits and so on, they are having to confront these choices. And the question of what you do after high office, what it means to be a leader who is unelected is actually a central political question for all actually existing democracies. So there are a few thoughts about leadership. It is, I think, in the field of high politics, I think it's without any question that this is a period in which there is a kind of drought. There is a drought of good leadership. Sure. And
also mentors. We're lacking good mentors these days.
Well, I think, part of the definition of a good leader is a good leader has the capacity to mentor. When I was writing my history of democracy, the life and death of democracy, which took me 10 years. I did field work in Nigeria. I was also in South Africa. And in South Africa, I met with people. I never met Mandela, but I met with people who were very close to him. And my question to them was, what is the secret of the attraction to Mandela? What is the basis of this authority? A man who suffered, a man who kept his integrity, who showed no malice when he came from prison. He could have taken revenge. He chose to compromise, to put South Africa on a path of pluralism, 11 official languages, no coup d'etat, no revenge against the custodians of and champions of apartheid. And the answer repeatedly from people I spoke to was that he had the ability to create many Mandelas around him, meaning not sycophants, not people who, worship him from the ground up, but who actually found him inspiring in his quiet way, and who they found radiated, his leadership qualities, so that they wanted to emulate that. They wanted to sort of carry that on, knowing that he would not boss and bully them into submission. The secret of a great leader, a great democratic leader, is that, the ability to inspire others, not to conspire against them. All this means that it's a hard act to be a good leader. But it's much needed.
So now, what can you say about Africa still underdeveloped, while almost all the mineral resources are buried in Africa? And what do you think they can do?
Well, we need to analyze the root causes of this dynamic, which has decadent effects on African societies and government. Obviously, the experience of colonization of competing empires is a big part of the explanation. Obviously, a big part of the problem was the arbitrary drawing of lines on the earth to create states that bore little relationship to the peoples who lived on the ground. This was then a recipe for conflicts, local and regional conflicts. And of course, not to be underestimated, every African knows this well, mostly, possibly some exceptions like Ghana, mostly the experience of post-colonial government was the experience of the degeneration of elections into dictatorship, and often military dictatorship, which then became extractive of resources, extractive power of local peoples. The Kenyan novelist Tiangbo is, I don't know if you ever read any works by him, but this is a great satire, brilliant satire. He's living in exile in California, tipped perhaps to become a Nobel Prize winner in literature, but his works are a great satire on this dynamic where the promise of freedom and independence and sovereignty degenerated into corrupt monopoly of resources, the development of local plutocracies. So, all of these dynamics are very well understood in the African context. The question is whether they can be broken. There were promises, there have been promises. The South African transition promised to break this pattern. But it now looks pretty clear that the ANC has degenerated, putting it simply, into a corrupt oligarchy that has not improved from the perception of many millions of South Africans, black Southern. It hasn't improved their living conditions. This is a great disappointment, and it produces a kind of restlessness within the society. An election is coming, they will probably win again, but with a reduced majority. But in a society that is not very pleased with their performance and not hopeful about the future of South Africa. It's in this context that the question is whether there can be a democratization, another round of democratization in Africa, to reduce violence, to reduce corruption, to improve the social or living conditions of people, in which there is the kind of leadership we've just been talking about, where humility and wisdom are important virtues in leadership. Do you think there are any positive examples in Africa at the moment?
I'm not sure.
Don't worry. I read Wole Soyinka, and I understand quite well the dynamics of this petro-poison regime. Country, as you say, second largest petroleum producer in Africa. Tremendous revenues, standing side by side with pauperization, important parts of the population, and the violence and the bigotry and the hatred that gives rise to it. This is a basic lesson that we are learning again after decades, globally speaking, after decades of what has been called neoliberalism. The doctrine that growth comes when governments liberalize. That means they privatize public services. They encourage the growth of wealth accumulation of the few. They encourage a kind of decadent form of capitalism, and that dynamic produces through time. Read Thomas Piketty's great book Capital, which shows that there is a long-term tendency.
But it's not working in Africa.
This is the point I'm making.
Privatization in Africa is monopolized.
This is what happens, and so the social consequence is that you have a widening gap between rich and poor, and the middle class feel small. The middle class feel endangered. They feel anxious, and they are prone to support corrupt rulers just to stabilize their own position. This dynamic is deeply anti-democratic, and we are learning that after nearly 4 decades of this globally, that what in Europe was called in the 19th century the social question has come back. The social question means that the quality of life in the society is not adequate, and that some things need to be done to improve the quality of social life. And how do you do that? Well, you do that through the formation of a civil society, an active civil society that contains within it moral resources and our capacities to improve the lives of people. But it also comes through governmental legal strategies of redistribution. This requires, here we complicate our understanding, rather ethereal understanding of leadership. Good leadership in matters of power-sharing democracy requires a commitment to redistribution. It can be called many things. It can be called social welfare. It can be called democracy. It used to be called socialism. And here we come, however, to an alternative that has appeared in these years of the 21st century, the China model. So the China model is a model of a form of state capitalism. It's one party. but it can have multi-parties. Actually, there are, formally speaking, there is a multi-party system in China, but the other 7 or 8 parties don't have any power. It's a model of development which is heavily state-structured, in which you have a functioning form of capitalism, of private investment, of private corporations, but where the state simultaneously builds education system, a healthcare system, systems of support for senior citizens, and pays attention to environment. Environment is increasingly important in politics. One could even say, by the way, that a good leader is someone who is the carrier of virtues of humility, of humbleness, including an awareness that good leadership pays attention to matters of environment, and that the environments in which we live should not be treated as mere raw material for humans to devour. That, in other words, respect for the biomes in which we live is part of what counts as a good society and requires good leadership. That too is in very short supply at the moment. So the Chinese model is an alternative, and it's the one that is beginning to be, in many parts of Africa, a clear alternative to the sort of neoliberal, pseudo-democratic, dictatorial, corrupt regimes that post-colonial Africa produced, often with great violence. And we, as you know, we're well aware of the growing importance of Chinese capital, of Chinese law and government, of Chinese diplomacy, of Chinese soft power culture in the African region.
And he's destroying Africa.
Well, could we talk about that? Because we need to be open to the complicated dynamics. There is, for example, there are contexts like Somalia, South Africa, Kenya, in which there is local support for this China model. Whether we like that or not is, the fact is there is this support for the rebuilding of parts of cities, for high-speed transport, for other infrastructure spending, and of course it all comes with strings attached, loans, long-term loans, yes, that may not be payable, may not be repayable, and
so what's the need?
And we know that this is not just a country-by-country strategy of the Chinese. I'm writing at the moment, I said yesterday, they are building an empire. Yeah. They're building a global empire.
Well, you heard what Anwar said, Anwar Ibrahim. He said it's an error for a socialist country like China to be advocating for free trade.
Oh, he said it's these are not normal times. Of course, it's a paradox.
Yes,
but it's also understandable in terms of the way that we come to multilateral institutions. That the Chinese rise to power globally has happened since the early 1970s because they have learned to operate the multilateral institutions in which they're located. A symbol of this, in the very week of 9/11, where America and parts of the West were completely preoccupied with the attacks on several places in the United States. In that same week, China joins the WTO. Which is more significant historically? There's no doubt that China's entry into the WTO is the beginning of a process, or it's part of that long-term process, where the Chinese practice free trade, but they do it through multilateral institutions, which they want to defend against the bilateralism of Trump and the bilateralism of the Theresa May government, the Brexit dynamic. This is a great paradox that needs to be understood, and as you know, there is the process of signing by African countries of this free trade agreement, the building of the world's largest free trade zone, is a dynamic that will reach the required number of signatures backed by the Chinese. Why do they want to do this? Because they of course know there will be tremendous business investment and profit made from this arrangement. And they also know that geopolitically speaking, Africa, if things carry on as Africa becomes part of the China state,
So
and
now,
not that of the United States.
what happens to the local industries?
Well,
What happens? There won't be development, there won't be growth, the economy of Africa will be dependent on China economy. So it's dangerous. It's, to me, the obsolete nature of leadership who doesn't care about the people that have elected them.
So what would be the alternative? Is the alternative?
The alternative is to boycott the loan from China.
Or you can do a Malaysian renegotiation of the loans. You can.
When we talk about renegotiation of the loans, is when renegotiation starts when there's a new government.
Well, it may. It's not necessarily so, but it is an alternative. I mean, the skeptic would say to you, okay, what is the alternative? You sound like a development and democracy guy in one country. So you would like a restoration of an imagined, sovereign territorial state that becomes the master of its own house and develops, preferably through good democratic leadership. I think this is a post-colonial vision, with respect, that seems to me increasingly to be unrealistic. The alternative is not globalization or, let's say, Chinese empire structured development or local development that is protectionist. The alternative is for local political elites, for local political leadership elected, who have the qualities that you are talking about. The alternative is that they negotiate hard and they do everything in their power to ensure that the local forms of investment, of production and exchange, consumption, are environmentally sensitive, that pay attention to the dangers of corruption, and including the corrupting effects of having large state-owned Chinese banks dictating how you will live. And to do all of that requires some kind of regional cooperation, which is the only way to handle this global dynamic. If you imagine that it can be done in a single country, this is the Brexit mentality. This is the Make America Great Again mentality. And I think both will fail. Brexit is a kind of almost textbook lesson in the follies, plural, of imagining that you can develop further by drawing boundaries and reclaiming your sovereignty in a world of growing interdependence, where growing numbers of problems cannot be solved locally. but require cross-border cooperation, both at the level of civil society and also at the level of government and law. This is a vision that's unfamiliar to most leaders. It requires great wisdom and great imagination. I'm not sure how many African leaders get it. I have to say that, this vision, this alternative vision, is one that has been much discussed and partly practiced in the European case. And if that's what European integration was meant to be, it's all in a crisis at the moment, and it's possible that the European Union will collapse. Leadership is low quality at the moment. There's no visionary leadership that Europe so badly needs at this moment. But the whole idea was that in a globalizing world of communications and cross-border flows of investment and so on and so forth, local development could only take place with the help of another layer of government and governmental intervention. So that, for example, if you ask the Irish, or if you ask the Portuguese, are you in favor of continuing European integration? They say, of course. You ask the Scots, of course. Why? Because they saw that good local leadership could extract resources and benefits and support from higher levels of government and higher dynamics, so to say, higher, greater than the territorial state in which they live. And they saw no necessary contradiction between the two. They, in other words, refused to be nationalists. And I put it to you that the dangers of nationalism in this period are rising. That's what Brexit is. That's what Make America Great Again, in Trump's case, is. And the growing temptation to think that the way to deal with arbitrary power, the way to deal with corruption, is actually to withdraw from the world. I think it will fail because, to repeat, I do not think that in matters of environment, in matters of trade policy, in matters of how you regulate the internet, you cannot do it at the sovereign territorial state level. It's a fantasy, it's an illusion, and it will fail, and it will produce local frustration and probably local, another round of local dictatorial corruption.
Okay, Prof, what's your advice to the young people in Africa seeing and waking up to see this degenerating effect of leadership in Africa? Because
live a long and healthy life, eat well, exercise well, love well, and commit with a passion to whatever activity you choose to do. That helps. It would be good for young people to live a long and happy life.
Because, one thing I understand about young people is young people have aspiration. A lot of young people have aspiration. Like yesterday, I was discussing with some young people. I was actually asking some questions. But one thing I understand is people will tell you this is what they are doing at the moment, this is what they want to do, but the problem is how to switch from what you are doing to what you want to be tomorrow. How are they going to switch? Somebody wants to be a billionaire, somebody wants to be a politician, somebody wants to be a footballer, but at the moment is an apprentice. What level of his life will he come and say, this is the moment that I'm about to switch to this career, this passion that I've been all this while lost? So I think that switching is the problem. I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say.
No, it's a very personal question, I can tell. And it's a more universal question. Every being on the face of the earth is required of a an early age to decide what they're going to do with their lives. Of course, it's possible to drift. It's of course possible to ruin your life and end in misery and unhappiness, of course. But if you don't choose that, then you have to think systematically about your question, which is the question. Partly, I would say, from my experience, meeting many in various parts of the world, partly it is a question of will.
Will.
It is something existential that at a certain moment you decide that you are going to take this pathway and not that pathway. And on that question of will, after having thought deeply about your options, it's a judgment, it's a taking a decision in a context where there are incompatible alternatives. But you choose to do one, you take one path. This is a basic, this basically has to happen. It's a very fundamental part of the answer to your question. The other is that we are not alone in the world. We never are. Language binds us together. We are social creatures. And we are entangled in institutions. We're born into a world of institutions. Therefore, choosing partners, building alliances, constructing networks is a very basic precondition for choosing the pathway that makes a difference. And so, this is the second ingredient. Of course, luck is important. Good luck. Just having good luck. You have a Nigerian leader even with the name Good Luck.
Yes.
How blessed. How blessed.